Greetings and welcome to the channel Love of the Truth. Today, I thought we would explore God's plan. What does God have in mind? Why did he create the universe? And what is his intent for mankind? One of the most interesting and abbreviated accounts explaining the overall plan of God is found in Acts 17. Paul was visiting Athens and had wandered around the town and had an opportunity to speak to those that were gathered there. They were in the habit of listening to all kinds of new ideas, and they gave him an opportunity to speak. And we're reading Acts 17:22 through 32. So Paul stood in the midst of the Areopagus and said, "Men of Athens, I observe that you are very religious in all respects. For while I was passing through and examining the objects of your worship, I also found an altar with this inscription, 'To an unknown God.' Therefore, what you worship in ignorance, this I proclaim to you." Now, I don't think that Paul's intent was to be insulting, but they had admitted that this was a God they didn't know. So he was leveraging that discovery and was proposing to bring to them some very important truth. Going on in that text, the God who made the world and all things in it, since he is Lord of heaven and earth, does not dwell in temples made with hands, nor is he served by human hands, as though he needed anything, since he himself gives to all people life and breath and all things. And he made from one man every nation of mankind to live on all the face of the earth, having determined their appointed times and the boundaries for their habitation. And next, Paul begins to explain why. What's God's motive? What's God's plan? That they would seek God, if perhaps they might grope for him and find him, though he's not far from each one of us. For in him we live and move and exist, as even some of your own poets have said, for we also are his children. So Paul is pointing out here that God doesn't need anything. He created everything. Created all the people, created the universe. It isn't like he needs a piece of fruit or a temple. Those things are so insignificant from God's perspective. He created all of it. He doesn't need any of this. But he does have a plan. He does have an intent. And his intent is that mankind would seek him and find him. Now, implicit in that is that God doesn't make himself glaringly obvious. Part of his plan is that it's not easy, that it's not simple. And we need to ask ourselves and ponder, why would God do it that way? Why would he make it so that mankind has to seek him? Mankind has to overcome. We'll read in other texts. Why would it be a test? Why would it be difficult? And there's a number of reasons. One, most of us have had an opportunity to observe rich children, children that inherited wealth, and have observed that for the most part, it's very difficult to instill in children that are born rich a real appreciation for what they have. It generally takes struggle and hardship and coming from a very poor background for people to genuinely appreciate what they have. And it appears that that's a component of God's plan, that his intent is that we would learn to appreciate the gifts that he's given. And when you look at a parent-child relationship, it's very apparent that parents really enjoy when their children appreciate what they're given. And parents are very disappointed when children fail to appreciate what they're given. So there is a purpose to God's plan. There is a purpose to the difficulty of mortal life. And that's another component of the struggle, is the fact that we are going to die. We're going to get sick. We're going to have to work. We're going to have to struggle. And that gives us context for the blessings that God has given. There's another component to it, and that is that God intends to reward those who love and obey him, and to destroy those who hate him, who reject him. But let's go on in the context. Being then the children of God, we ought not to think that the divine nature is like gold or silver or stone, an image formed by the art and thought of man. Now, the most blatant point here is that Paul was in the middle of an area dedicated to idolatry, to idols, and he was making a stark contrast and making the point that their poets acknowledged that people are God's offspring, people are God's children. And Paul is making a very logical point. If we're the children of God, then we should understand that God isn't an idol. We're like him. He made us like him. I know that the skeptics have tried to insinuate, or just blatantly stated, that man has created God. That is absolutely not my understanding of reality. God created the universe and everything that's in it. And that's obviously what Paul was believing. In Genesis 1:27, we read that God created man in his own image. In the image of God created he him, male and female created he them. So humanity, mankind, humanoid, is the image, the visual representation of what God looks like. It's a very consistent usage of that word image in the Hebrew, and I'm not claiming that I'm pronouncing it correctly, but the Hebrew word is tsalem, and it always means, all 19 times that it's used in the Old Testament, it always means a visual representation of just about anything. There's a number of texts that use that term. But the fact that God made mankind to look like him is significant here in this context. Paul uses that logically to discredit the idea of idolatry. So let's go on in the text and see what we can find out. Verse 30, therefore, having overlooked the times of ignorance, God is now declaring to men that all people everywhere should repent, because he, God, has fixed a day in which he will judge the world in righteousness through a man whom he has appointed, having furnished proof to all men by raising him from the dead. Jesus is the man that God gave the authority to be a judge, to be the judge of mankind. So God is the ultimate source of this judgment. God is the authority behind that judgment and the origin of that judgment. But he has appointed Jesus to do the physical judging and has furnished proof that he appointed Jesus by raising him from the dead. Let's go on in the text. Now, when they heard of the resurrection of the dead, some began to sneer, but others said, "We shall hear you again concerning this." So Paul went out of their midst. But some joined him and believed, among whom also were Dionysius the Areopagite and a woman named Damaris, and others with them. This idea of the resurrection of the dead startled the Greeks. That was not something that was part of their worldview. They believed, like almost all other pagans believe, that there is life during death, that death is not actually the end of life. And the scriptures are very clear that there is life after death in the form of resurrection, that being raised from the dead is God's intent, God's plan. Those that are righteous will be raised with a reward, and those that are wicked will be destroyed, will be raised to judgment and then destruction. Looking in Hebrews 11:6, again we note that it says, "And without faith it is impossible to please God, because anyone who comes to him must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who earnestly seek him." And this is very consistent with Paul's message there on Mars Hill, that God's plan is for men, for people, men and women, to seek for him and to believe him and obey him, and that he is a rewarder of those that do so. In 2 Corinthians 6, verses 14 through 18, we read, "Be not unequally yoked together with unbelievers. For what fellowship hath righteousness with unrighteousness? And what communion hath light with darkness? And what concord hath Christ with Belial? Or what part hath he that believeth with an infidel? And what agreement hath the temple of God with idols? For ye are the temple of the living God. As God hath said, I will dwell in them and walk in them, and I will be their God, and they shall be my people." So this is a process. This is a transformation to become God's people. Now, it's true that in one sense, all of mankind, all of God's creation belongs to him. All of mankind are God's offspring. But there is a deeper sense in which, by seeking God, finding God, believing in God, and obeying God, we become his children. Let's go ahead and read the rest of that text. Wherefore, because of that statement that God made, come out from among them. And that would be unrighteousness, unbelievers, Belial, infidels, idols, all that entire opposite camp of righteous, godly, and believers. Come out from among them and be ye separate, saith the Lord, and touch not the unclean thing. We are supposed to interact with the people around us, our neighbors, our community, our nation, our globe, but we're not supposed to have anything to do with the evil that they do, the evil that they offer, that the world offers. Touch not the unclean thing, and I will receive you. God will receive you if you separate from uncleanness, and will be a father unto you, and ye shall be my sons and daughters, saith the Lord Almighty. God's plan is to produce people who choose to be his sons and daughters. God's intent is that there is free will, so that we can choose to reject him. We have that liberty if we want. We also have the ability to choose to believe him and obey him. And those are the sons and daughters that he wants in his plan. Looking at Revelation 21, verses 7 through 8, God says, he that overcometh shall inherit all things. Those that overcome their own temptations to do evil and the enticement of the world and the struggle of life, the struggle to find God, to come to understand him, and then to conform and obey those things that he teaches, that he stands for. He that overcometh shall inherit all things, and I will be his God, and he shall be my son. But the fearful and unbelieving and the abominable and murderers and whoremongers and sorcerers and idolaters and all liars shall have their part in the lake which burneth with fire and brimstone, which is the second death. Sadly, those who hate God, and he equates refusing to believe him and obey him with hating him. And I think if we think about the parent-child relationship and reflect on how we as parents feel, if our children reject us, it translates as hatred. But God is looking for, in his plan, he is looking for people who choose to be his sons and daughters. Thank you very much for your time. I would certainly appreciate it if you have any questions or any suggestions for new topics, any comments at all, that you would click down below and put those comments in. Thank you again.